Welcome to all our panelists. We'll start the formal panel at 9:30, and until then we'll have a informal chat. I'm sure everyone was busy watching the president give his address. Dan, did you watch the president?
Of course, absolutely. Absolutely. Did you watch until the very end when he put his mask on?
Over his eyes.
That was hilarious.
Anthony, I don't know if you saw the movie Eyes Wide Shut. Anthony, I was just wondering if you saw the movie Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise.
A good while ago.
I couldn't help thinking when the president tried to put his mask on afterwards and got it over his eyes, that it was very reminiscent of maybe Eyes Wide Shut.
I think it's just can't bear to see what's actually happening in his country.
Welcome to Dr. Eve. Great to have you on board. Dr. Eve, did you watch the president?
I listened to the president. Yeah.
And any thoughts?
Yeah. Very excited. I'm going to open my sex store on the 1st of May. Very excited.
Fantastic. Do you think you'll be in one of those categories that is going to be allowed under phase 4?
I do. Yeah. Minimum staff and low risk and essential needs. Meeting essential needs of people.
And you'll be able to keep a good 2 meters away from most of your patients.
No, I'm high risk. So, so I am. I have a son who is.
Dan, okay, you can't see me, and I don't know how to get onto the video.
Okay, I'm going to mute you, Dori. Sorry, Dr. Eve. We now looking at you brushing your hair.
Okay.
It looks lovely. So you were saying you're high risk and you have a son?
Yeah, I have a son who's a professor of infectious diseases at Groote Hospital, so he's a frontline worker. And so all he's been doing is just reminding me now through this talk that I'm isolated for another 6 to 18 months because of my high risk. So I will not be going into my rooms at all for the next at least 6 months. I will be just doing Zoom consulting, continuing this way. My staff will be able to go in and run my store.
Then fantastic. And Katrina, you in fact have been doing a lot via Skype and Zoom and or WhatsApp. I think you've been consulting because you keep a practice in various different countries, don't you?
I do actually. I've been working online for I think the last 5 years. I have a practice in London, I have a practice in Johannesburg, but I have clients from Australia to China to France to the US. So it's somewhat been business as usual for me, but it also hasn't, because I really do miss my office, my space, my practice, seeing people in person, seeing the guy who makes my cup of coffee in between my clients. Like, I really miss the social interactions we get on a day-to-day basis.
And in terms of a professional approach, do you find it as effective using technology to consult with patients, or is the face-to-face still much easier and better for you?
Look, I think it really depends. I think face-to-face is always preferable. But, I've been so fortunate that I've had a lot of South African clients who've immigrated, and I've been able to continue therapy with them. And yes, as a therapist, I have to work a little bit harder. I have to be paying attention all the time. I have to be focused. And you might lose a little bit of what you would get in the room in terms of the energy. But overall, my clients who've moved from in-person in my practice to online, it's been relatively seamless for most people in the preparation that we've done with them.
So just to tell people that we're going to start our panel exactly at 9:30. We're in the warm-up phase at this point in time. So we're just chatting informally until 9:30, and we'll begin formally at 9:30. So Dr. D, you join us as well. And how are you coping under lockdown?
Well, Howard, I tell you something. I would rather talk to 20,000 people live, unprepared, without knowing what the topic is. Absolutely fine. Other than having to deal with all this technology, it just absolutely freaks. And I've also been dealing with a lot of international groups long before this happened, running forum groups and so on from all over the world. But doing everything under tech, I'm coping well with the lockdown. In fact, as you were saying earlier, Marlene, I must call you Dr. E. as you were saying, you know, I think that there is a bit of dichotomy, and some people feel guilty about saying that they're quite enjoying parts of it when it's just such an internationally unprecedented time of uncertainty and disaster. And I think that there are a lot of things that go together. You know, I think that personally it's possible to enjoy that downtime and be concerned about what's happening in the world at the same time. You know, I think that that's true of what we're going to be talking about. You know, I think you can enjoy some connecting and special time with your partner and with your family, and wish that they would get out of your hair and want to take some downtime as well. You know, so I think that there are a lot of things. For me, feel privileged in that I'm here. We're living in a very, very comfortable and good environment. Both my children are here. Very fortunate that I have some help in my house, because my staff live in Zimbabwe and they didn't want to go home because of the quarantine. So, you know, it's that part of it's been fine, but also dealing with people, you know, one of whom is really seriously suicidal at the moment. And the uncertainty even of high-level CEOs who I spoke to today about their businesses and about what's going to happen. And it's mainly that. I've also been dealing.
Okay, Dori, I'm going to stop you there because we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and we're going to keep our answers very short and very, very sharp and to the point. So, Anthony, you're a GP in Cape Town. That puts you at the front line. I presume you've been able to continue your practice, but what measures have you taken to make sure that you personally are not exposed? And before you answer that, I just wanted to remind the people who are coming on that we're starting the panel at 9:30 exactly. And we're just in a warm-up phase at the moment. And at 9:30, we'll kick off. And we're just chatting informally. So, Anthony, tell us what's happening in the life of a doctor in Cape Town at this point.
Well, everything has changed. We're still working, but the nature of practice has fundamentally changed. So in my office at the moment, and I think this reflects many of the offices like mine, GP practices in the community, we've had to make major changes. So the first thing that you got to do is you got to mitigate risk. Risk to yourself, to your staff, and to your patients, which means that you just fundamentally change everything about how you decide who's going to come into the office and how you're going to treat them. So just very practically, if you phone the office, the secretary is going to ask you what kind of problem you have. And if there's even a hint that you have a respiratory condition or a fever, then you get assigned to a telephonic consultation. So suddenly there's a lot of telephonic consultations and adaptation. And personally, I've always been really against these because the human interaction is so much a part of what makes the doctor-patient relationship important. But this is something which you've had to adapt to. But in addition to that, you come into the room, you sit on a plastic chair, newspapers, magazines are there no more. People are spaced out so that they're at least half an hour to 45 minutes apart from each other. They only come in if they really, really have to. Numbers have fallen off dramatically, so there really are fewer people coming in at the moment. And then everybody's wearing a mask, or encouraged and should be wearing a mask, as am I and my staff. And if we do happen to get somebody in the practice who's got a respiratory condition, we isolate them, put them in a side room, put a mask on them if they don't have it, and then really try to treat them and move them out of the practice as soon as possible, and then sanitize. So there's this strange combination of intimacy and relating on the kind of level you do with your doctor, and this apartness which you have to keep. So you've got to get used to reading people's expressions in their eyes, and you've got to kind of be aware of the fact that you need to convey a certain amount of human emotion when for half of your own face is covered. And there's anxiety, of course. We're all feeling anxiety. I suspect we're going to communicate more about that just now.
I want to ask, we've got 3 psychologists on the panel, and maybe we start with Dr. Eve, but this anxiety that people feel in their day-to-day life, what is the way to release it?
So it's a time to turn to trauma practice, and there we really are informed about how to manage both a microcosmic as well as a macrocosmic experience of high anxiety, of trauma, and even PTSD triggered from legacy traumas as well. So it's a matter of really going into the absolute basic principles of treating trauma, which is self-care and self-compassion and kindness and self-care for others and compassion for others, which is, you know, part of what we're doing today, and gathering in community and having a lot of social connection. So there's certain real tools in a toolbox that one can use, and which I use, and I'm sure the others use in terms of clinical work, to be able to soothe and to work with people's anxiety.
Katrina, you have a practice in London as well, where in fact the COVID virus has been very rampant. Have any of your patients been diagnosed positive?
I have had several patients diagnosed positive, and I have a very good friend who's lost his father recently to COVID. So it's been something that has affected all of us personally, affected us professionally. No one has a kind of 101 guide on how to do this, you know, on how to do a global pandemic. So for all of us, we're going to be affected in one way or another, whether we're in London or whether we're in Johannesburg.
It's a very sad story, because I don't think anyone is in fact unaffected at all. Dr. D, you in fact are very much part of the YPO group. You facilitate groups for them and the President's Organization. How has it affected kind of the global business community?
I think it's affected them severely. You know, my first kind of realization was that there was an assumption that the greatest anxiety was going to be getting sick or catching the illness, or at least a member of your family. And in fact, I was finding that the greatest anxiety was what is going to happen to my business, or what is happening, loss of jobs, having to retrench, and huge financial concerns, even in that. And a kind of a real awareness and compassion. We might say that we're in the same boat, we're in the same storm, but many of us are in different boats. And there's the recognition of that. And so people are anxious, most particularly because of the uncertainty.
I can imagine. Just to remind people who've just joined us, and I see we've got about 380 people online on Zoom. We've got, looks like another 150 or so on YouTube. We timed those numbers by 2 and 3 in order to get our total numbers. So we probably have about 1,300 people busy watching us at the moment. And we're going to go live in approximately 2 minutes. We delayed this panel in order to listen to our presidential address. And Marlene, or Dr. Eve, we were busy saying a little earlier that when President Ramaphosa put his mask on afterwards, I think you were listening, I don't think you're watching, he got his mask on wrong and actually stuck it over his eyes, almost like a blindfold. And it seemed very reminiscent of maybe one of the scenes from Eyes Wide Shut, when maybe a mask becomes a little fetish toy to play with during lockdown.
Yeah, I don't know how much pain people are really in the mood for, you know, when you have such levels of anxiety. The brain doesn't really allow a lot of playfulness to be happening. You know, you go into survival mode and you just really want to do the basics of surviving. So sex isn't really tough in most people's brains.
But Dr. Eve, you do have a store, and people can go in. Is it an online store, a physical store? How can people who are looking for products actually access them?
Just get onto drevestore.co.za and you have a beautiful full store that is just waiting to go to you. And I mean, I see it as sexual rights, how we, you know, always have this is a sexual right to people's pleasure and right to sexual health. So for me, it's not like a kinky, oh, let's get some sex toys. It's part of people's right to have health and to have pleasure. I mean, things like lubricants and moisturizers, and just different forms of sexual activity, which are enhanced through using toys. So yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to give people the right to have that kind of pleasure again by themselves. A lot of lonely people.
Just remind us of the website address again.
It's drevestore.co.za.
Fantastic. The time is now exactly 9:30. We've delayed this broadcast by 30 minutes in order to allow our president to have his say. I'm sure everyone was very relieved that we're starting to lift some of the restrictions, but at the same time, today's figures of over 300 new infections is very worrisome. So please, while restrictions may be eased, doesn't mean to say that you should be going out and shopping or doing things without sufficient care. So on behalf of the Jewish Report, I want to welcome all our panelists and all our viewers to the approximately 1,600 people who are busy watching us late this evening to our adults-only panel called 50 Shades of Lockdown. First of all, a huge thanks to Dan Stillerman, as always. Dan is really the engine behind all of this. Without him, we'd be unable to put on these panels. Dan, thank you once again. We've called you a tzaddik, we've called you a saint, we've tried to canonize you in many ways. Today, maybe we're going to call you a sex god, but whatever we can give you to thank you for putting all these panels together with us, just a huge thank you from, I think, everyone watching and our entire community and everyone on the panel tonight. Thank you for everything that you do for us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Howie.
Also a reminder to all the readers of the South African Jewish Report, we have published this week again, both in hard copy and electronically. We are delivering to all the Pick and Pays, the Woolworths, the Dis-Chems. The hard copy is still available. Also, people who gave us their complex details, where there are more than 10 copies required, we are delivering to over I think it's 90 complexes and blocks of flats around the country, and those deliveries will take place this morning. So tomorrow morning. So if you're in one of those blocks of flats or townhouse complexes, please wander over to your guard tomorrow morning, get a hard copy of the SA Jewish Report. And if you're unable to get it, please remember www.sajr.co.za. I'll repeat that for you, www.sajr.co.za. You can go and download the entire full edition of this week's Jewish Report online now. So please avail yourself of that opportunity. You can do it while you watch us. You can do that tomorrow morning, but please make sure you get your copy of the Jewish Report. And a huge thank you to all of our staff who are working from home, but under enormous pressure to get this newspaper out, despite the restrictions, despite the lockdown. And just a huge thank you to all of you for all the effort that you put in, our remarkable team at the Jewish Report. So thank you from all of us as well. So I want to tell all of the people watching, particularly those people on Zoom, how you can in fact access the panel tonight. So you'll see, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a number of very interesting buttons. The one says chat, and if you click that chat button, you will be able to chat with everyone else. We will see your name if you use the chat functionality, but please feel free, chat with the panelists, chat amongst yourselves, comment on things that are going on. If you would, however, like to ask the panel a question, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. And all questions submitted to us, in fact, are completely anonymous. So feel free to post the question in the Q&A chat. That is, in fact, all anonymous. Q&A questions to the panel. Chat, everyone can see who you are, and you can chat with everyone else along the way. So welcome to really a remarkable panel of three of South Africa's probably most prominent sexual health and relationship experts. So I'd like to welcome you all. We have a few media stars on today. So first, if we can start with Katrina Bofford. Katrina is a clinical sexologist and psychotherapist with a practice that really spans the entire globe, and is certainly no foreigner to media and particularly radio in South Africa. So Katrina, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Howie. Thanks so much for having me and for letting me join in this awesome panel tonight.
Great. And we have another media star, Dr. Eve. I think everyone probably knows you from 702, but I'm not sure that they know that you're internationally trained as a sexologist and a couples therapist. Fantastic to have you on board.
Thank you. Nice to be here with everybody.
And another huge media star, Dr. D, who was probably the first psychologist on 702 and the one who gave for many years relationship advice on 702. But not only that, one of the world's great facilitators and moderators, involved for many years with the YPO organization, and someone who Nelson Mandela called a good friend.
Yeah, that was a great honor and something that I really treasure, Howie. Very special to be here to talk about something that is so central to all of our lives.
Fantastic. And Dr. Anthony Smith, a GP in Cape Town, a fellow of the European Committee of Sexual Health. Anthony, fantastic to have a medical professional on the panel as well. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Howie.
So maybe we can begin with a very quick whip around the panel, because this entire lockdown period, it's been difficult for, I think, so many people. So tell us what your patients are telling you now. How are you feeding your practices? What is the mood out there? And let's start maybe with Anthony first.
Well, it's a mixed bag. The practice is a great deal smaller than it was, so there's a lot fewer people. We're seeing those who are most sick and really need to see us, because we screen very carefully the people who come in. And invariably, everybody that we speak to, we talk about their experience of what the lockdown is like. First of all, there's an incredible amount of risk assessment and mitigation. So everybody is very aware of everything around them. And even a small movement towards a person, a shaking of the hand, can elicit an unconscious flinch. So we're subconsciously now integrating this fear of contagion, which is surrounding all of us. And this plays a big part in the way that you look after your patients, because so much of what it means to look after your patients is to touch them. The physical touch is an intrinsic part of what it means to be a doctor. Interestingly, though, that patients say different kinds of things about their health. Some of them will say they've never felt better and more at peace. Others are saying that they are feeling increasingly more anxious. And it's almost like a standing joke that when they come to see me, they say it's the first, second, or the third outing that they've had in a number of weeks. So a doctor's appointment has actually turned into an event. It's no longer not just the doctor's appointment. So they just want to stay and socialize and hang around for a little while. But it's a mixed bag, and there's a lot to say about it. I'm sure we'll come through to more of it a little later.
Cool. Dr. Eve, how are you experiencing it?
Well, the first thing that I had to do, Howie, was to get myself to be in a less anxious state. So I was in New York when it all kind of happened. So I kind of experienced the horror of New York shutting down, and the horror of me having to get home in a real hurry and being afraid that I wouldn't be able to do that. So I went team before lockdown. So I've been isolated for a number of weeks, actually. So that was my first, as a therapist, that was my first port of call, that I had to use all of my tools in my trauma toolbox for myself. And I went into a lot of community in my trauma community of really being able to practice my own self-care, self-compassion, kindness to myself. And once I was emotionally regulated, through a lot of exercise, Pilates, dancing, and shout out to my teacher, thank you every day for being there for me, was able then to be in a much more regulated space to be able to work with my clients. So that's kind of really helped me, and that's kind of an ongoing course which I practice every day. It's part of my practice daily. To be able to be a therapist is to be able to be in a much more emotionally regulated space, as I say, to contain my own anxiety, which obviously is very helpful for my clients.
Katrina, yourself, do you also do that same kind of meditation, Pilates, exercise?
I do, Howie. And you know what? I think being very real with my clients has been crucial, to tell them, actually, I'm also not okay, and I'm also experiencing anxiety, has been unbelievably helpful for those who feel that sometimes maybe the therapist is in a different position to them. But it's been a really, really interesting time. And you get different groups of people. You get some of my clients are just kind of like, let's just carry on the work, and I want as much normality in my life as I can get. And then other clients want to talk about what they're experiencing, directly related to anxiety, stress, the fears that they're experiencing around so much uncertainty that we're facing. And then people who are experiencing difficulties as a direct result of the pandemic and the lockdown. So loss of jobs or fears over the end of relationships, being pregnant and heading towards having a baby and what that means at a time like this. So I'm having to hold all of that for my clients. And I think it's so crucial that I also recognize sometimes I'm also not okay, and it's okay that I'm not okay. So yes, just like Dr. Eva said, doing things like meditation, taking a walk around the garden, feeling some sun on my face, listening to a good audiobook, just detaching a little bit when I need to take care of myself so that I can help take care of others.
So Dr. D, do you agree with this? Is it okay to not be okay at this time?
And I think that the kind of reactions that we're seeing of grief and of fear based on uncertainty are actually normal reactions to a very traumatic situation. I would be more concerned if people said that they felt exactly the same, wondering whether they're actually in touch with reality. Kind of goes with the territory. And I certainly echo the sentiments of my colleagues to say that you really have to take care of yourself in a way. So there's the loss of the world as we knew it, the uncertainty about what we're going to find, the loss of physical contact, which I know we're going to be talking a lot about, the loss of jobs, the kind of real concern about money. And, you know, all of those losses are putting us in another level with unprecedented anxiety. So this taking care of yourself, I think, is important. The ability to be able to name what you're going through so that it doesn't overwhelm you. The extent of the connection. I mean, people say that we are physically distancing. Doesn't mean that we have to socially distance, although, of course, there's a recognition that it's not the same. But what I'm seeing, particularly in terms of couples, is, you know, the whole result of for better, for worse, but not for lunch. Yeah, you know, that's right. I mean, people in lockdown, and, you know, these are cliches, but there's an underlying sense about all of that. Usually we can have closeness without intrusion. We can have space without distance, because that's underscored by a sense of continuity and security. These kind of balances are very, very difficult now. And the lockdown is acting as an incubator in so many ways. I mean, it's just highlighting. If there are areas of difficulty, my goodness, those are manifesting. No, and other areas still are getting balances are a real challenge. And I know we're going to be talking about all of these things in the panel tonight. So it's a challenge. You know, if you have an open, communicative relationship, it helps. If you don't, somebody called me up and she said, you know, when lockdown is finished, I'm out of here. And I don't only mean out of the house either. You know, I've come to that realization, this relationship is not going to sustain. And whether that's the right kind of decision based on a small, protracted period is a question. You know,
Yeah.
so
Well, I have that same feeling, and I live by myself. As soon as lockdown is I'm out of here. So just to remind people that you can access our panel with any question. All the questions are completely anonymous. All you have to do is click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and all the questions get submitted through to me, and they're anonymous. Even I can't see who's actually asking them. And there certainly is a flood of questions coming in. And Anthony, do you mind if we start with you, because we have a few medical questions that I think need answering. The first question comes from someone who says, my partner goes out, they're at work, they come home at night. Should I be taking any precautions when it comes to intimacy or sex with my partner? And the second part of that, is COVID a sexually transmissible disease?
Okay, I mean, I think this is a key question, and I'm glad we started with this, because on the face of it, you may be tempted to think that it is a sexually transmissible disease. Technically, it doesn't appear to be. The best of the evidence that we have so far is that genital fluids, sexual intercourse is not going to convey the virus, and it's not found in semen. It's not transmitted that way. However, it is transmitted via kissing and via exchange of saliva, and also by proximity to bodies, the proximity of two bodies. So sex and bodies coming together are going to invariably increase the risk. So there's absolutely no doubt about it that increasing the risk and having sex or sexual contact with anybody who isn't a partner who is not exposed to the virus within your household is going to increase and amplify your risk. So your question is then about this person who's going out. It really does depend where they're going, where they've been. But even the fact that they've gone out, unfortunately, increases the risk. And then you have to do your risk assessment. If you're a person who's vulnerable, if you're a person who's at a greater risk, and perhaps even if you aren't, because we know many, many people who aren't necessarily at high risk, nevertheless can become very ill and critically ill. So unfortunately, somebody who's going in and out of the house is definitely going to be at greater risk. And then it comes down to a question of what can you do? And there are steps that you can do. This is very similar to what doctors have to do with their partners when they're coming back from working. And there are guidelines to doing this. There are steps that you can take, which usually involve cleaning yourself, discarding your clothes, showering, and creating different parts of the house where you're able to, in a sense, get out of your outside clothes, discard them, wash yourself, and then reintegrate into the inner, cleaner household environment. So there are ways of getting around it, but it's very hard to be able to be specific about your risk, because this this enemy, this virus is just an unseen force. So you have to take a little bit more care than would clearly be the case, or would you be maybe instinctively care to do. So yes, I mean, I think that does attend to that to that question.
Okay, so when you actually come home, do you first thing remove all the clothes after you've walked in from practice, get into a hot shower? What are the steps that you actually take when you come back? Because you're obviously, you're in your practice, you're in the surgery, you could potentially be exposed. What do you practically do when you enter the home?
So, I mean, the first thing I do is that at the moment when I'm in the office, I'm wearing scrubs. So I actually take my home clothing, and immediately when I get into the office, I'm changing out of those clothing onto a set of other clothing altogether. Then when I get back home, it really, if I'm going to be absolutely careful, then you want to remove your clothes, you remove your shoes, put them in a washing machine, wash them, and the temperature that you're going to want to wash clothes that have been exposed to COVID-19 is at 60 degrees. And you want to go and step into the shower. But you also want to be careful about little things like your phone or any other, or a pen that you may have, because that also can be a potential service. Now, that may be a little bit much, but if you're somebody, and it's not to say there's many asymptomatic carriers, so everybody at the moment in our practice has to be treated as if they've got the virus. So you really should be taking these kind of universal care. It's about creating boundaries between your outside risk associated environment and your inner safe environment.
So with all of these precautions and with people's heightened senses of anxiety, Dr. Eve, how are people's sex lives? Are they better? Are they worse? People are being shoved together. They have nowhere else to go. How is it actually affecting people's love lives?
You know, I think the fact that I'm hardly talking about sexuality at all anymore is indicative of what people's needs are. Howard, the need is really for relationship containment and for being able to manage oneself in the face of a partner or by oneself, and managing all the different, feelings that are erupting inside of one. So the jury's out in terms of what the frequency of sexuality is, and also how exploratory or experimental people are being right now. We don't have the research on that. The tiny bit of research that I have read comes from the Kinsey Institute, and that was Justin Lemler, one of my colleagues, who did some research. He's doing it at the moment with college students, and shown that actually their frequency has dropped as well as their masturbatory rates have dropped. So I'm not really getting people saying to me, oh, you know what, I'm feeling, so terribly horny. That's not really a problem. How it does manifest itself is I'm seeking more attachment with my partner. I'm seeking more closeness with my partner, and my partner is somewhat avoidant. And it's working in that space of what's called attachment styles that I'm really spending a lot of time. Also, different things are emerging that haven't really emerged before in sessions, because I find that with this lockdown, people are forced to somehow become more honest with each other, honest with themselves and honest with each other. And so things are emerging, things like I had an affair, or I am having an affair, or actually I don't have a relationship, or I'm bisexual, or I'm lesbian, or I'm gay. And these things are emerging in therapy now that would have taken much longer time to process in a relationship. So there's a sense of kind of urgency now, the Thanatos and the Eros. So the Thanatos is kind of ruling more than the Eros right now.
So we're in a pressure cooker, and everything's coming to the boil.
Yeah, kind of. It is like.
Katrina, there's a question that's just come in from one of our viewers, and this person says, how can I make sure my sex life stays intact with my kids always around, especially with them not being in sync with their regular schedules? That's number one. And maybe a question for Anthony, part two of that is, should I be wearing gloves?
So Howie, I think it's such an important question that this person has asked, and it's something that I'm hearing from so many of my clients, so many people on social media. When we're all confined to the same space together, it becomes very difficult for us to create that intimate space for ourselves as partners. And so, so many couples say to me, oh, we want to be spontaneous, we want to have a spontaneous sexual experience, we want to go back to what it was like in the beginning. but that was before kids, that was before work, that was before coronavirus, it was before lockdown. So the reality is that for a lot of parents, you have to plan to be spontaneous and you have to plan your intimacy. So can you schedule in time to prioritize your relationship, to prioritize your intimate connection with one another once or twice a week, where you and your partner have time for yourselves and your kids understand that that is time for the two of you, and they should be perhaps entertained, maybe watching something, maybe playing together. Maybe it doesn't involve sex. Maybe it simply involves you and your partner cuddling on the couch, just being alone and being able to connect. I think it's really important to plan that intimate time that you spend with one another, because we are constantly in each other's space at the moment.
So, Dr. Eve, earlier you told me that in fact there are two different conflicting poles of whether people are having more sex or less sex at this point in time. So we actually asked Dan to put together a poll, and I'm going to actually ask him to put it up, because let's actually hear from the people whether in fact they're having less sex, more sex, or the exact same amount of sex. Let's, Dan, actually ask you, and let's remind everyone that all the results are completely anonymous. We'll have no idea how you're voting. And of course, a lot of people, Dori or Dr. D, are busy watching probably with their partners. And does that make them more honest or less honest when you're answering a poll like that, if you're not sitting there alone and you're with someone else?
I think a poll like that will be honest, because it's a factual thing. You know, are you really having more or less? It may be harder to answer, but it is a factual thing. But I'd like to echo, you know, with what Dr. Eve said. There's a sense of more urgency and immediacy somehow when the rug can be pulled out from under you in a heartbeat like this. There's a recognition that the future is now. It's today, not tomorrow. And there you are with your partner. So I think that in many, many cases, it's an opportunity for kind of cleaning the space, for clean space between you. You're sitting across the table from someone, you know, who's been in your life for that amount of time, but what do you really talk about? You know, the dogs have got worms, or who's fetching the kids, or, you know, what are we doing on Friday night? You look at this person and you say, but who are you really? What do you think? You know, what do you feel? What's your most radical fantasy? What kind of fears do you have? So it's an incredible chance to reconnect in a way, almost like another meeting with someone who, you know, is not so, hasn't been that intimately in your space in terms of connection. You want understanding, you want sharing and support for the kind of extreme feelings that you might be going through at this time. And I think some of it's also danger, because if you just launch into that suddenly and it is uncontained and can explode, the potential for emotional abuse, sometimes even physical abuse, lack of containment and spilling out is also there. So that depends quite a lot on whether you're both buying into it and using it as a connecting opportunity.
So we know in fact that about 58% of people are watching this alone. One or two people say not with a partner, with other as well. But we're asking people to vote now. Are you having more sex or less sex, or exactly the same, or none at all? And it's very interesting to see the poll results coming in. About 35% of people so far tell us that they're having more or less the same amount of sex, 28% less sex, 10% more, and 29% say no sex at all. Dr. Eve, I was listening to you on a radio show a week or two ago, and there was a caller into the radio show that in fact said they were feeling enormously horny during this period. Is that a natural reaction?
Yeah. So when you're dealing with anxiety and this emotional dysregulation of people look for different ways to control their emotions. So things like alcohol, like smoking, like drugs, like gambling, like going to work, like gymming, all of those things were kind of removed from us. So what they do is that they would then turn to sexual activity as a way of releasing anxiety, because there is also something incredibly beautiful for the brain when you are connecting with somebody from physical touch point of view. So seeking that out through sexuality brings a certain amount of relief. So the horniness, can one tease it out and say, I'm horny because I'm sexually horny, or I'm horny because I'm anxious? And does it really matter? And that's something that needs to be negotiated between partners, because while one partner is going to feel incredibly anxious or horny, the other one might be feeling incredibly anxious and avoidant. So how do you marry the two? I want to pick up on something really important that Dr. D said just now, and I hope we're going to get back to that. And that is the story of, intimacy, terrorism, the violence that's happening in the homes right now as well. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to pick up on that, because I hope whatever sex is happening is consensual between both partners.
Anthony, I think this question is from you. It's come in and it says, I'm a guy and find it difficult to climax. The person hasn't said whether it's specifically during this period or generally, but if someone came to you as a patient and said to you they were having difficulty climax, how would in fact you advise them? Is this a physiological issue? Is it a psychological issue? How do you determine that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's not an unusual question to have, but the approach would be the same to any kind of sexual problem. And you'd want to, first of all, if somebody came and I didn't know them, you'd want to sit down and establish a relationship so that you could get a sense of making them feel comfortable. And the first thing you want to do is get permission that they know that they can speak to you, that what they say is going to be confidential, and also to, in a sense, have permission to use the kind of language and to speak openly in ways that they don't necessarily always speak. And I think this is often more the case with men, who can feel very uncomfortable, and sometimes they do present a kind of side issue with some other medical condition, which they would feel more comfortable presenting as kind of the first card from the deck, and then they'll play that last card as they're leaving the doctor. But really what one would do then is get a very strong sense of what the context is. And as a rule of thumb, you can often tell if something is a relatively new problem and is situational, you get a hint that this could be a psychological type of problem, and in which case you would explore the context, the environment, the nature of the relationship, the concurrence of mental health problems, any particular stresses that could be existing. But if it was a problem which is in the context of a lot of other medical illnesses, in the context of medicines that are being used, in the context maybe of an older person with a lot of comorbidities, you'd want to explore those quite thoroughly in order to be able to link them up and see exactly what the problem was. So there's a lot of hints and clues by virtue of how quickly, how severe, the context, coexistence of anxiety, and then you can kind of narrow it down. But I'd have to say that sometimes you can't really so clearly define, and in fact, it may even be not the right way to think about it, to define between the psychological and the physical, because they really meld into each other to such a high degree, especially if a sexual problem has been there for a long time. It then takes a life of its own. And the seed which started the problem takes a little while to get there as you kind of hack down all the overgrowth that has occurred as a result of the initial problem. That is to say, the secondary anxiety, the anticipatory anxiety, the performance anxiety, and the relationship fallout that comes as a result.
A lot of questions I see coming in about pornography at the moment. So people saying, I'm watching more. In fact, just as a story, I don't know if you saw, it started in Italy, but Pornhub started offering free premium membership to people who would agree to stay home during lockdown. I see that's about to end, I think, today or tomorrow. So there may be many disappointed people, but Pornhub results show that there's been about a 12% increase in pornography usage. And in places like India, approximately an 80% increase in pornography usage during this period. Katrina, do you see that amongst your patients?
I do see it amongst my patients, but I'm actually interested to hear what Dr. Eve has to say, because this is very much her realm of work. So Dr. Eve, I don't know if you want to give your insights into it, because they're much more thorough than mine.
Katrina, thank you. Yeah, the porn queen. Pornography, it's not really porn. I mean, let's just talk to what it is. Pornography is just the vehicle for masturbation. And masturbation is the tail end of that. Thank you, Anthony. It's just really about as having the experience of orgasm. So why do people masturbate more right now? It's because it is a self-soothing mechanism. And we're going to turn to anything that is pretty self-soothing right now. So I really don't want people to be judging themselves or feeling guilty or shameful around the fact that they're turning to masturbation and porn to be able to get rid of some of the anxiety. The difficulty and the problem that always comes in with porn and or masturbation is that it's kept secret. It's kind of seen as part of cyber infidelity. It's seen to be as a cheating, a betrayal. So people, you know, the question I do ask clients right now is, do you disclose to your partner? Do you take separate time to be able to give each other the right to be able to have separate times to be able to do whatever you want, which may include masturbating to porn if that's what you want. So as long as there isn't shame around it and there's an acceptance that this is something which is pretty soothing for me. As I said, the problem comes in when a partner is going to be discovering, you know, you've been masturbating to porn all this time and I've never known before, but now that we're locked in together, I'm discovering that you are doing this. The other issue with that always is that, well, it's much easier to masturbate to porn than it is to negotiate a sexual relationship with a partner. So in this time of lockdown, you may have thought, you know, this is such a great opportunity to be more sexual with my partner, but actually because of the high anxiety and because of the different conflict styles, it's actually easier for me just to take care of myself.
So, Dr. Eve, in fact, someone says, without entering the religious arena, how much, if any, viewing of porn is normal? That's question number one. And number two, do you believe that viewing pornography tends to warp the expectations of one's partner, whether relating to sexual acts themselves or perceived standards of beauty?
Yeah, okay. So I can't talk to the religious element of it at all. You know, I know that in Judaism, it's prohibited because of Onan. So it's something that people have to decide on for themselves. You know, that's not something for me to take judgment, ever to take judgment or to talk to. It's a very personal decision that people have to make around that. And then the second part of that is really what people kind of revert to always as a way of either distancing themselves from porn or finding justification in using it. Like, you know, it's violence against women and women are not agreeing to it, which isn't really true today, because the kind of porn today is really more about webcams and women taking great authority over themselves and doing that. Of course, there is always the incredible pain that their partners feel, finding that their partners are watching porn, because they will go, if it's a male who's watching, will go into a comparison of, I don't look that young, I don't look that attractive, I'm not looking like that. As long as one can keep perspective that that's kind of their jobs, and their jobs is to look a certain way, and they do a lot of surgery to enhance their body so that they have the kind of penises or breasts or butts that they need to be having in order to make a living, really. So we want to be able to separate that from the reality of what, you know, sexuality is really all about. And it's always a beautiful discussion, I think, for couples to be having with each other, rather than to keep it secret and shameful.
Right. A question maybe for Katrina that's come in. Someone says, I've been using Grindr and been doing video wanking with guys across the world, safe and very satisfying. But this raises an entire question about all these dating apps. Are people still on dating apps even though they can't actually leave their homes?
They are, but what I've heard from a lot of people I've spoken to about this is that there's a lot of superficialness, or if that's even a word, you know, there's a lot of superficial connections that are happening, that people are almost reaching out to others through dating apps just to get some form of connection, whereas other people are actually looking for deep and meaningful connections through these apps. So I love to hear that this person who asked this question is practicing responsible social distancing and is using this virtual platform to experience pleasure. I think that's awesome. And I would encourage people that if that's what they're looking for, if they're looking for a connection, if they're looking to experience pleasure, if they're wanting to establish relationships with people, amazing, fantastic, enjoy it. But be aware that it can be tedious. And a lot of people have said to me, I'm exhausted. I don't want to be on my screen at the end of the day. I don't want to have small talk with people. And I'm finding it really difficult to engage with somebody who doesn't really give me much to work with when we're on these apps having a chat.
Right. Dr. D, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think that what happens is, if this is witnessed or discovered without prior knowledge by the partner, it's always interpreted personally, very often, or egocentrically. So instead of being able to accept, if there was some conversation or openness about it, of what the need is about and what it's for, often people are saying, well, am I not good enough? Am I not attractive enough? You know, do you not want, why do you need this? do not want to be with me. And so I think that that's the part that also needs to be dealt with, because it's very hard sometimes for people to accept, look, you know, just having that outlet and being able to do this doesn't really have anything to do with you, you know, at all. It might be just an additional thing, or as Dr. Eve was saying, it's sometimes easier than negotiating your own sexual relationship. But the problems that I've seen that it causes is because there's not only the comparison, there's a whole thing about shame and good enough and adequate enough, and why can't I be the one to meet those needs?
Dr. D, there's a question that came in, or maybe a comment, and it says, spending so much time in the same space with my partner, I found we have lesser quality connection time and conversation. I fear complacency in the dynamic forming, and we are on complete different wavelengths, as she works all day and I don't have any work at the moment. And I think this also comes into a question that you posed when we were chatting earlier, and that is, if you had a choice to go into lockdown with the person you're currently in lockdown with, or someone else, would you choose your current person, or would you choose someone else? But while we asked Dan to put up that poll, I think it's very important to maybe actually ask this question. People are spending a lot of time together, and within that pressure cooker, as Dr. Eve was describing earlier, sometimes they're not feeling that connection that they thought they would.
Absolutely. I think, you know, sometimes something that appears to be an asset can also turn into a liability if you don't adjust the volume. So perhaps some of the time can be good, but too much time can get to be exactly that, too much. So the way that it seems to be working with people who's saying that they've got it right is that they recognize the necessity for their own downtime without doing what I was saying earlier, is interpreting it, oh, you don't want to be with me. You just, you know, you want to be by yourself. Why is that? Do I not meet all of your needs? And so it's the recognition of times of coming together that you can look forward to, even if that coming together, and I'm only talking about the sexual side of it, is looking at a series or a movie or something that you are both enjoying and feeling that kind of connection at times, and maybe at set times, and recognizing the necessity and the value, in fact, to your relationship. And not taking it in the way that I've just been talking about, of saying, okay, these are your times. It makes it much harder if you've got little kids. It requires task negotiation, sharing and who's doing what, and maybe stepping into roles that are not familiar, you know, working that part out as well. So there's quite a lot to work out, but the recognition of some personal time, whatever you're doing in it, and then connecting time and working out the right kind of balance is incredibly important. And I think it can dilute the relationship if there's just too much, because all you're thinking of is inside you. Is it's too much? Why do they talk too much? And I need to get out of here, and I just want some of my own space. And it doesn't mean that I'm no longer in love with this person at all. I just need the space.
Katrina, you wanted to pick up on
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with what Dr. D was saying, and from what Dr. Eve was saying about the fact that it's so crucial at a time like this, when we are all experiencing uncertainty, frustration, anxiety, stress, that we don't actually turn that on each other and use it against each other. You know, it's at times of stress that we actually need to be reaching out and connecting more with other people. We need to be asking for help. We need to be saying we're not okay. And if we constantly turn it against each other and use it against each other, we are not going to be creating or fostering the right context for desire and the right context for intimacy.
Dr. Eve?
So just a heads up for everybody, that's what I'm talking about on my show tomorrow, 702, 10 at 11 o'clock with the CBS, how to manage conflict. And what I'm finding becomes, to pick up on what Katrina's saying as well as Dr. D, is what I'm finding is that people are discovering that the way that they're having conflict is really understanding their differences in what I keep coming back to, which is attachment style. So when one person is more anxious in their attachment, meaning they need way more attention, they need way more conversation, they want to be sharing, they want to know the person who's around them, they may be with a partner, locked down with a partner who is more avoidant or ambivalent and not used to and not comfortable at all being so closely attached, and would normally, in the normal course of life, whatever that was, be able to find ways of managing to avoid conflict or conflicting differently by having separate spaces, separate times. But in this lockdown, it becomes way more intense, where the attachment styles become obvious and they really have to first acknowledge it. And I've got, a whole blog on that and a whole conversation going on, as I said, tomorrow on radio, about some ideas on how to recognize what your attachment styles are. And from there, work with enormous amount of compassion and self-care and kindness towards the other and respect. And then you'll be able to do what Katrina's saying. Then the connection can happen in a more authentic way.
I think that is so true, what you're saying, because what people do is they act out, or they become angry, or they become attacking, or they might even become silent. But usually anger and all of that's kind of range of behavior is the second thing that people feel. Often it's to do with being hurt, being needy, being lonely. But in order to access that even, let alone say it, requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, most particularly in men, more than in women, but in both, is seen as a kind of weakness. It's kind of an admission that I'm sore and I'm not coping and I'm anxious. If one could stick to the original thing that you feel, which are those, and say what I would like and what I need. But often that step is lost. And so people see just the behavior, not the feelings underneath, which is often unacceptable. An unkind and acting out kind of behavior, which is attacking. And when you attack, the other person either will attack back or defend. So the original issue might not be aired, let alone dealt with.
Can we actually ask Anthony? I see there are quite a few medical questions coming in. So Anthony, if I could refer some of them to you. One says, how often should a single man of 57 years be having a release through masturbation to remain healthy?
Yeah, this reminds me of, there's a wonderful slide of Norman from Cheers. You may recall Norm from Cheers. So they asked the question, what is normal in terms of people's sexual lives? Well, I mean, this is it. Norm is a guy who sits on a bar at the bar of Cheers, because normal otherwise doesn't exist within this kind of context. So really the very short answer to that is that there's no one figure that you're going to be able to say. For some people, it may be compatible with their lives and healthy for them in the sense that they very seldom masturbate. They may have absolutely no, their libidos may be very low, it may be a lifelong thing, and it just may be compatible with who they are and what their lives are. And others may masturbate a great deal. The health or the how problematic your sexuality is very much depends on the effect it's having on you, how you're using it to equilibrate your emotional life, and the effect it's having on other people. So if it's the case that you are extremely, if you are masturbating a great deal, such to the point that it's you're neglecting other aspects of your life, you've clearly got a problem. If you are not having a libido and it's deeply unsatisfying and you're very unhappy about it, it's going to cause a certain amount of suffering, and that would be a problem. So it's not so much the actual absolute number, it's more the context and the effect that it has on you and the people around you, which would answer that question.
Okay. If we can throw in another medical question, it says, anxiety about the situation is exacerbating my partner's vaginismus. Can you suggest anything that might help her?
Vaginismus.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is
that a medical or is that something for the therapist?
It's on the fence. It's totally. I'll start very, very shortly and maybe hand over to Katrina about that. But if your hypothalamic pituitary axis, Dr. Eve has spoken about this a little bit. If you are hyper anxious, your adrenergic system, your sympathetic nervous system is hyperstimulated. You're anxious, your muscles are tense. The capacity that you have to go to a relaxed state, which facilitates pleasure, is going to be diminished. And especially if you've got pre-existing problems, or if this is something which comes on the back of previous psychological issues or trauma, or an anxiety personality predisposition, then it may be something which is going to give you problems. So heightened anxiety, mental health issues as a result of the shutdown, these are all something which are going to adversely affect you and can lead to vaginismus.
Yeah, and vaginismus, which is a sexual pain disorder, or vulvodynia as we are calling it, is affecting 1 in 6 women. It's a very, very common difficulty that a lot of women are facing. And it is, in my belief, a both physical and psychological experience that women can have. And at a time like this, when anxiety is through the roof or can be exacerbated by certain things in our situation, such as the uncertainty that we're facing, being in close proximity with somebody we don't feel emotionally or physically safe with, the worries that we're holding on to about what next and what if, that can all exacerbate it. And the higher up that anxiety goes, the lower down our ability to engage sexually with our partner and to experience pleasure. And the way that I explain it to my clients, and if we're talking about pain that is not consensual and wanted, we're talking about pain that is distressing, that is very real and is not wanted. If we look at pain and pleasure on the opposite ends of a spectrum, pleasure doesn't feature for a woman who's experiencing sexual pain. She's sitting very much on the pain end of that spectrum.
Right. I think we've got maybe a few related questions, and let me ask Dr. Eve this. A question's come in that says, my partner and I normally use poppers during sex. Now we have run out and reaching an orgasm is difficult and frustrating. What can we do?
Whoa, that's a hard one. I mean, that's going to be a totally different sexual experience, because you're not getting the high that you used to. It's like somebody's no longer drinking and suddenly sober, or somebody's no longer smoking and suddenly getting the withdrawal of that. So poppers will do the same, and Anthony will be able to give you a better medical view around what poppers really do. What can you do besides pray? You just got to accept that it's going to be a very different sexual experience that you're going to be having right now, and it's going to not feel as good. It's going to feel different. It's not going to be at that level of orgasm that you're used to. The therapist, I would kind of go into like what got you started into using poppers in the first place, without judgment, because they're kind of cool, I know that, but it is something that you would have to adjust to. It's going to feel a little different. It's like becoming sober and trying to have sex when you're sober. It feels really different, and it's not going to feel as satisfying. But you adapt. I mean, Anthony, the medical side of poppers.
Yes, I mean, they're a group of drugs which gives an incredibly intense high. So you have a massive dopaminergic outflow, and the level, the pleasure pathway just becomes overblown. So your experience means that you're shortcutting all the adjustments that you would otherwise be making in order to kind of accommodate and get to know the nuances of what causes you to find pleasure. So, it's a little bit like a massive cheat. You're just taking something which just gets you down the center of the highway without looking at any of the scenery very, very quickly. So it's a very tricky thing. And you do see this quite a lot with chemsex and with people who are hooking up under the influence of drugs, because the high is so high and so pleasurable that it becomes something you bind to very quickly. And it becomes very hard to experience something which is a great deal more kind of gray. You lose the subtlety and the intensity, and that's actually seen as a loss and very hard to adapt to.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that, because it's so important what you just said now. If we take poppers out of the equation, but exactly that response, Anthony, that you're talking about, that's what's happening to people right now, is that they've become so attuned to each other and so over familiar with each other, right? This whole, what Esther Perel talks about, the mating in captivity, that the over familiarization with each other takes away sexual desire. And what the brain seeks out is novelty and experimentation and exploration, which is why porn provides that for people, because porn gives you novelty at a click. You can just get something new. So your brain is constantly sparked, and you kind of lessen your anxiety for a little bit. And it's the same as getting onto a dating site, right? And Zoom chatting with somebody new or somebody unfamiliar, your brain is loving that, which is why we're drawn to that at this time as well.
I reckon my next question, probably no one on the panel is qualified to actually answer. So I'm definitely going to pose it. This person says, what are your thoughts on the laws of Taharat Mishpacha, family purity in Jewish law, from a physiological perspective?
So, I mean, I want to talk to it from a sexual perspective. I certainly can't talk to it from a physiological. I don't know, Anthony, if you can do that. You know, I think that they're great in that they the philosophy behind it, or the theory behind it, is really positive in people's lives because it brings in that novelty and it brings in that newness. I don't know how practical it is. I mean, that's for people to choose for themselves. And I can say that one of the most basic sex therapy tools that we use, or interventions that we use, is something called sensate focus. And sensate focus is a little bit like that, where couples go in, and I would recommend it for the people who are kind of just getting off poppers, where you move away from penetration, you move away from the goal of orgasm, and you get into a place of just sensual touching and reconnecting in that way. So the laws of purity, you know, kind of like that. You get into it, you have a break, you get the novelty back again, and it feels, you know, wonderful again under certain circumstances. I mean, for many folk, it doesn't work well.
Yeah. On our next question, I think it may actually be a relationship question, but it says, my partner and I got a third guy to join us for the lockdown, so we're having a lot of amazing sex. Sometimes my partner and me are all in a threesome, or in the threesome. I hope that we can adjust to just being alone with each other after he leaves. He's so creative sexually and brought so much spice. But Dr. D, this is really a relationship question, because when the third person leaves, what happens to the two who left behind?
Yeah, I think it's really quite a challenging and interesting question. You know, they both consented to this. I mean, all three of them, so they're in it, and it might be a readjustment. I think the behavior, I mean, certainly you can't really separate their sexual behavior from their relationship. So, you know, they are introducing some kind of novelty and newness in a very consensual and exciting way. They're making the lockdown very, very different. And I think what the question is around fear of what's going to happen when they're not there anymore. It's certainly given them permission and something to do that is different. And perhaps that kind of desire for that sort of connection and experimentation will be part of their continued relationship. I don't know whether it would always mean inviting a third person in, but it might be, well, we tried something new, something different. It enhanced our relationship. We enjoyed it, and you know, together. And perhaps maybe Dr. Eve can say that it stretched their internal yardstick a little bit and made them think out of the box, so to speak. What would you say?
I just think it's wonderful that somebody's asking that and breaking out of what we call the monoheteronormative model, which we know it's just shining a light on that not everybody is monogamous and heterosexual and normative according to cultural beliefs of what normal is. And this is just opening up into a polyamorous relationship. And the first thing that came to me was like, why does it have to end after lockdown? And they've just moved into what's called a throuple, where they've opened up their relationship. Wonderful throuple, as Dr. D was saying, it's consensual between adults. And, you know, maybe this is their lifestyle that they have ignored and now finding that they want to move into that, which is what a lot of couples are doing. They're making decisions differently now about different relationship structures and different negotiations around agreements that they want for their relationship going forward.
You know, one thing that I'd be concerned with that, and maybe the other panelists can answer it, is I think that sometimes what I've seen is the message to their partner is to say, you know, I can tolerate all of this. I'm above the possessiveness of the connection. They wanting to give that kind of message, but perhaps in reality, part of this might be it's not going to be forever. Part of it might be it's getting us through the lockdown. And that I want to, you know, I want to reconnect just with you after this, maybe in a more connecting way.
So can in fact we pose a similar but very different question, and that about being a passion killer. We have a question by someone who has pets who climb onto the bed. And they share their bed with maybe a dog or a cat or numerous animals as well. What do you do in terms of sex when you have animals running all over your bedroom and your home?
You put them out the bedroom.
Exactly.
Simple as that. You put them out the bedroom.
You know, it's easier probably to put our children out of the bedroom than it is to put out your dogs and cats.
True. Probably true.
So, but maybe one of the partners is saying, you know, I don't really feel like this now, and I'm showing you by having the dog right next to me. Can you not get the message? You know, it could be if they really, really wanted to connect, you know, they would, as Catriona says, take the dog and put it out for as long as it takes. Perhaps it's another message.
Yeah.
So can we actually address the issue of single people? Because I think there are a lot of people by themselves during lockdown. It's a very difficult period. They don't have a partner with them. We've got one of our viewers, in fact, has said, I haven't seen my boyfriend since lockdown. He lives with other people, which includes 2 children. How do we safely connect again when we see each other? But I think there's a unique almost category of single people who by themselves during this period. What do they do?
I guess they do what they've always done, which is either masturbating or having living apart together, long distance relationships or dating apps, or maybe just asexual, or deciding that they're aromantic. I think, that's a category, but the one that you're saying, for an example, is when people have locked down differently, or in separate homes, or in different countries or different cities. It's just magnificent that we have this thing called Zoom, because it adds another element of being able to be quite sexual in a different way and connecting in a different way, because we know that the antidote to depression and loneliness is social connection. So obviously there is this wonderful technology that allows us to interact with people that we love, and it doesn't have to be a lover. It's about family. And the new relationship structure, which is very popular now and being recognized as valuable as a romantic relationship, is that of friendship. So let's not shame people because they don't have a lover or a partner. Just have a friend who's just meaningful and intimate and connective to you, and that is a real, as I repeat, an antidote to loneliness and to depression.
Katrina, you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize that there's a very big difference between being alone and being lonely. I speak to so many people who live on their own or are single or are not with their partners. And a lot of the time they're quite content being on their own. They enjoy their own company, they enjoy their own routine. But the sentiment that I'm getting from a lot of people who are in that situation at the moment is that it has exacerbated that sense of loneliness, as if it's kind of shutting off those opportunities to connect socially and physically. And if we just look at what research shows us about the power of touch and how important that is for our psychological and our physical well-being, even our immune system, it can be incredibly hard to experience loneliness and be on your own at this time.
Yeah. So I think
Dr.
that the power of touch needs to be replaced by the power of words and that kind of connection, because what people are asking for, if they're missing each other, is to hear that they're being missed. Are you missing me? Do you still care about me in the same way? What is going to happen to our relationship going forward? And I think those are a lot of the questions that they really want to know. They need the confirmation of the relationship verbally and perhaps in other ways that they're not getting through even the close hug and the head on the chest and that kind of cuddle.
Yeah.
Dr. Eve?
I want to bring it back to the actual story of couples. It doesn't mean that because you're coupling up, that you're getting the physical touch that you want, or any kind of physical touch as well. It can feel way worse to be locked down with somebody who's not touching you, or not touching you in the way that you long to be touched, and hasn't for years. And now it's really extremely felt, and it's incredibly painful. And that's a lot of what's happening with couples who I'm working with, where the distance or the disconnect and the detachment is incredibly painful than somebody who's living alone and has always lived alone.
One of the questions, sorry, Anthony.
I was just going to add one last thing to a demographic we haven't talked about, which is the elderly folk. And I mean, certainly in my interaction, this has been a demographic who've been cut off from their grandchildren. And often it's so curious that when I see them, and I've seen them recently, they're the demographic that will instinctively forget about the lockdown principles and turn out and put their arms towards you in order to kind of create that involuntary sense of touch. And I think it's just important as well, just for us to keep in mind these people around us, and for us to be reaching out and be able to create new kinds of connections in order to compensate for these absences, which otherwise kind of glue us all together.
In fact, I think Dan has a poll for us. Talk of the devil. What do you long for most? A hug, a kiss, sex, cuddle, words of affirmation, or others? So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what people are actually missing most. Anthony, there's a medical question that comes in and says, I'm 30-something male, and it takes me hours, if not a day, to reload and to be able to climax again after an orgasm. Should I be worried about this? Is this a problem?
So, I mean, I would probably say that if this is something which had been there throughout this 30-year-old's life, and had been consistently the case, then it's possibly, and it's so hard to be able to answer this question because multiple factors can interrupt this. But then if there's no other factor, and for example, just to divert slightly, medications, for example, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, can classically do this kind of thing. But some people just have a longer latency period. And so if it's lifelong, then it may just be something which is neurobiologically kind of that's your set point. But if it's something which is relatively new, and also it's being compounded by anxiety, then perhaps it is a problem. It would also be important to try and figure out what that actually means. Not just the, and what measures have been taken to try and help it. And sometimes the measures try to help it and the meanings extracted from it can be the source of the distress, and those can be the sources of the problem.
Okay, I think interesting to see the results coming in that in fact, the thing that people miss the most is in fact a hug. 32% of people miss a hug most, 6% for kiss, 12% only sex, 25% a cuddle, and 22% words of affirmation. So very interesting. I wonder if that's reflective of maybe the gender of people watching us. So Dan, can I ask you actually, let's put up a poll and see if it's men or women or both or watching us at the moment. And let's actually get an understanding if it's a male or female audience we're actually talking to. Catriona, I think one of the questions that came in is, do you have any advice for people who dating via Zoom? Like what can they, do you put on a virtual date? What do you do to make it all special?
I think it is so important to be making an effort, like you would make an effort if you were going to meet this person in real life, in person, or IRL, as we talk about it these days. So yes, make an effort. It is so important to put that effort in, not just for the other person, but more importantly for yourself. I think that desire and arousability and confidence starts with us first. So if you're feeling in that sort of mental space going into the date, you're going to be feeling a lot more amenable to the flirting, to the connection. And if you're met with somebody on the other end of the line that hasn't brushed their hair in about 4 weeks and is still wearing their tracksuit pants, you're probably going to find it quite disappointing that they haven't reciprocated that effort. There's also something wonderful about taking this opportunity when we don't have the opportunity for physical connection, for dates outside in social settings, to try something new and be creative and be playful. I saw something particularly wonderful online the other day about a couple who played it was naked or strip bowling. So they had to, bowl. They used cups and they used balls, and they had to bowl. And for every time they got a strike, they had to remove a piece of clothing. I think this was a couple of dates in. But I mean, mean, it's a wonderful way to actually be creative and playful, which is crucial for us in building that chemistry, that attraction, and that desire for one another.
So, Dr. Eve, any ideas of how people can spice up their Zoom dates?
Before we go there, I'm just looking how we add a question that's coming in about how can we suggest a safe porn website? And I'm going to suggest a really fantastic app called Rosy, ROSY. I'm mad about it. It's a wonderful sexual health site with a lot of sexual health information and with really a good choice of porn as well. So ROSY, download it on your app and yeah, enjoy it. You'll get a lot of wonderful sexual health information from it as well. Zoom dates, that's kind of the new reality. I mean, nobody's really been meeting in face-to-face for a long time. We've been on, on dating apps or dating sites. And so the idea of sitting on technology is very familiar to a whole generation of people and even older people, that's the way that they're interacting with each other. The only thing I would say, adding to what Katrina's already said, is to just be careful around your privacy and your safety. You just want to make sure that the person isn't recording so that they could use it like porn revenge against you or something like that. So it would be my only concern that I would want people to be aware of.
Dr. Eve, you're actually talking about safety. You mentioned a little earlier that there are many people in relationships where there's abuse and there's no escape at a time like this. Are we seeing in helplines and things like that a rise in domestic violence?
Exponentially, unfortunately, and this was they're calling this a second part of the second global epidemic or public health epidemic as a result of coronavirus that we all need to be aware of. As well, we are as clinicians, obviously, and Anthony, of course, would always be as well. That this is something which is horrendous that's happening in every country in the world, where helplines have had incremental increases in calls from women. And there isn't really enough shelters. South Africa did try and establish some kind of shelters for women, more shelters for women, but not efficient, not able to provide for the huge need that there is. So you can hear even on radios, there are adverts all the time, don't turn away if you hear something happening. So I've got a whole blog and I did a whole radio show on this as well, on what's called domestic terrorism. So please refer to my blog and read about it. I've got some great tips in there, which I gathered from international people who are doing this work on how you can help yourself and help other people.
Can I remind people that you can submit any question for the panel, use the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and all questions come to us anonymously. So, or at least you have that option to send to us anonymously. So please make use of that functionality at the bottom of your screen. Katrina?
Sorry, it's just to go back to the safe porn sites. There's also a wonderful erotic literature app called Dipsea. So like to dip your big toe into the sea, DIPSEA. And it's wonderful erotic short stories that are beautifully acted and ended a wonderful kind of cliffhanger that leave room for the imagination.
And let's not forget about Oh My God, Yes.
That's OMG, yes.
OMG, yes. You want to be watching that OMG, yes, for anyone who really wants to learn about female orgasms. Do that and get some homemade porn or make your own homemade porn. That's a site.
So is that a site or an app?
It's a site. OMG.
So,
oh my God, yes.
OMGyes.com, I presume. Dr. Eve, can I ask you this? Someone is saying you were discussing pornography, which of course is widely used, but we must be at the very least mention the abuse of women in that industry. It simply can't be ignored. So maybe I can expand that into a slightly broader question. I think there's an assumption that people in the porn industry or sex workers are forced into those industries. They're never there by choice, and they're abused by merely being in those industries. Is that perspective true, or is some of it by choice?
Back in the day when there were cameras and film crews and porn used to be, big industry, there certainly was abuse of women, and it's documented. There are documentaries of porn stars who will tell those stories. It's changed. The porn industry has changed significantly now, where, as I was saying earlier, it's now mostly anyone who has a webcam sets up an account and gets into business on their own. So it's very empowering for many women to be able to earn money in that way without actually having real life sex with somebody, but still getting paid to do what they seem to love or because what they need to. I mean, I'm just thinking immediately about somebody who contacted me today and said, could I please find her a blesser? And I think everybody in this country knows what a blesser is. And it really broke my heart.
Maybe explain to us what a blesser is.
A blesser is an older man who would take care of a younger woman who would want him for university fees or just food and credit card or a car or cash. But just at this stage, it just broke my heart, because it was like, here is somebody who may just, be wanting to do transactional or sex work just because there is such a need right now for people to be fed and to pay rent and to be able to just feed their children, that somebody would reach out and say, find me a blesser. So we want to be aware of that as well and be cautioning women not to go down that route of abuse.
Dr. D?
Howard, just for a minute, because I just don't want to lose the value of those polls, both of them that we just saw, that people said that the vast majority is, if you add up the percentage of people who wanted a hug and the percentage of people who wanted a cuddle, 12% only said that it was sex, and even less, I think, a kiss. And then you looked at the gender, which we didn't really unpack. There was very, very little difference between the men and the women. And I think that the pervasive way of looking at it is that men are always needing to be ready and able, otherwise they don't think of themselves as, Anthony, I'm sure you can comment on this, of good enough or a real man or whatever. Whereas in fact, going through all of this, what we can offer, maybe in addition or in a very powerful way, is connection and understanding and empathy and kindness that is more reminiscent of just give me a close hug, offer me that kind of reassurance that I'm of value. And I think that that's so possible it's important to know about, and in some cases not possible, depending on the relationship, but possible to do, and to not forget about, to say that we're all members of the human race, and that those are kind of basic needs for this kind of validation and connection, especially in an environment that is so fraught with anxiety and uncertainty.
No, I think very, very valid point. Anthony?
If I could just take that a little further and comment on this, and I think that point about men potentially being able to connect to that part of themselves, which is kind of historically a little bit less well expressed, that part which it expresses the need for intimacy rather than a particular kind of sexual activity, can be given and is possibly being given a voice in the current time, because there's an unreality about the lockdown, the unreality which may open up the capacity to be not only more experimental and creative, but also to acknowledge that the forces which cause you to be in a particular way have also fallen away to some degree, so that you can express other parts of yourself without there being as many social constraints. It's a little bit like you got a get out of jail free card for a short period of time. I think, and if I just go back a little bit to that question of the threesome and that concern about what's going to happen after the lockdown is released. I mean, I sense also there the anxiety that this kind of this wrapped vacuum, which is protected from other kinds of forces, is going to be opened up to the light and to kind of real life with all of its complexities and anxiety. So while we've spoken a lot about anxiety and about chronic stress as a result of the lockdown, I think it also is worthwhile thinking about the positive effect of how this kind of sense of unreality allows us to really morph and find aspects of ourselves which we then potentially could carry into a more normal life afterwards.
Love that.
Mm.
Anthony, you alluded to the fact that this may be the time for some exciting new changes in your relationship and your love life, maybe this is the time for great imagination. So we will end this in a little while, in 5 or so minutes, with everyone giving a suggestion of what to do. But we still have a few questions to come to. And I want to ask Katrina, because people are waking up in the mornings, often next to a partner, and that partner's hair hasn't been dyed, and maybe their eyelashes or eyebrows haven't been done, and they're looking a little different, and maybe they haven't had a chance to have Botox now in 6 weeks. And it's almost like waking up next to a completely different person. Is that an excitement for a relationship, or is that break for a relationship?
Well, I think it speaks to what you find attractive about your partner. So if all you find attractive about your partner is when their forehead is completely still, their eyebrows are done, and when their hair is dyed, I would say we have a little bit more issue there that we need to explore. But I would ask you to say to yourself, well, what is it about my partner that I find attractive? And when did I find my partner? When did I last find my partner attractive? What were they doing? Because very often when we ask people that question, what the research shows us is that it's not necessarily physical attributes that are attracting us to our partner. It's very commonly when our partner is doing something, like perhaps we're hearing them on their meeting calls all day, and we're hearing them in a very different personality than what we get them at the end of the day. So when we're seeing them in a different light, or when we're seeing them help with the kids, or help us cook dinner, or when they're coming over to us or glancing at us from across the room, it's those little things that can actually help to build attraction rather than just the physical.
So let's touch on the physical for a moment, because you were quite instrumental in getting Dis-Chem to reopen up part of the Dis-Chem stores where they're restricting condoms and lubricants and things like that. Tell us the story.
It's not necessarily that it was instrumental as much as I had a lot to say about it. I was sent a picture by a friend of ours who had photographed at a Dis-Chem in Johannesburg that they had kind of used tape to cordon off the sexual health items and sexual health products, so lubricants, condoms, feminine hygiene washes, and so on. Now, in my mind, what that shows me is that Dis-Chem does not deem these products as essential. And they are incredibly essential in order to protect us from unwanted STIs and unwanted pregnancies, in order for us to aid arousal, to help with sexual pain for women who experience endometriosis, for those who want to have anal sex, for those who need extra lubrication because they are, post treatment for cancer, for menopausal women. There are so many reasons why these are essential products, and we were able to speak to somebody very high up in Dis-Chem, a colleague was, and thankfully these have been deemed essential products. And as Dr. Eve was saying at the start of this call, I really hope that sex toys will also be deemed as essential products.
Well, I'm sure Dan has a poll for us on that, because I think many people are missing, whether it's booze or weed or cigarettes or sex toys. And we'd love to see from the people who are busy watching us, what is the thing that you're missing most of all? Because Dr. Eve, you have a store selling sex toys, do you not?
I do. I've had a store for 26 years now, Dr. Eve's store.
Are your customers men, women, or both? What's the sort of breakdown that you have?
Oh, back in the day, 26 years ago, it was just men who would come in and say, hey, can you give me something that I can just slip into my partner's drink so I can get her to get a little more horny? And eventually kind of got rid of all the men and made it a women-only store, and then went online, and the demographic has changed, the age has changed, the gender has changed. It's mostly women and partners. And anything non-binary, who knows, who's really shopping. I don't really do much of a stat on that. It doesn't really matter. It's just that people are really accepting sex toys as being part of their right, part of their pleasure. And as Katrina was saying, I'm very much more into the sexual health aspect of it. So I have a magnificent range of lubricants and moisturizers, which are really necessary for people to be able to have pain-free sexual pleasure and sexual engagement and communication, really.
Dr. D, there's a question that's come in, and it says, Tinder have opened up the distance borders to connect with people far away. I love that. It gives me the opportunity to engage with people online, close and far, and have conversations with no expectations. So are we actually wasting our time having these Tinder conversations with people in different countries that we will never ever meet? Or is that part of a natural process of communication and reaching out? Is that something we should be encouraging?
Absolutely, because I think that we forget about the role of good conversation in the chase and seduction. Sometimes we want to get to the destination before enjoying the journey along the way. And some of it, that is the destination. And we've been talking about loneliness, but even if it's not desperately lonely, the wish to connect, the excitement of meeting someone else, the exploration of a new relationship, the unfamiliarity that becomes, I think like that too, or gee, do you really like that? The kind of looking for points of connection. And I think that if you can do that anywhere, it's not always about as soon as lockdown's finished, we're going to meet and, have this, it's only for the passionate relationship that comes at the end of it. I think there's a whole lot of enjoyment along the way, and many people might be seeking that. And even if they are seeking a different destination, it's probably a good way of getting there.
So I see our poll results are in. Most people, about 65%, aren't really missing anything during this process. But the thing that people seem to miss most of all, when they do miss something, happens to be alcohol. Is that, do you think, because alcohol makes them drunk, or alcohol breaks down their inhibitions and allows them to maybe be more sexually adventurous?
Who you're talking to, Hal?
I'll allow any of you to actually.
Look, I think it's been a problem, actually. Maybe I can just make one comment about it, because we've been talking about sexual abuse, and often those kind of spilling out of huge frustration and acting out in the abusive way has been associated with alcohol. And now with alcohol banning, there's also alcohol withdrawal symptoms. People who are really either substance or abusers or alcoholics are experiencing the effects of withdrawal, which is making them, act out of control. So I just think that also it could be just the enjoyment of a relaxing glass of wine at the end of the day. I don't know what you would like to say, Dr. Eve, about the role of alcohol and missing it.
I'm going to defer to Anthony to
Okay.
That's exactly what alcohol does.
I think for the most part, it's hard to know what percentage are withdrawing, because that's really a particular kind of syndrome, which has a particular kind of profile and can be dangerous as well. I would imagine more that medicine is being used as a light, socially acceptable kind of medication to subdue anxiety. So what you have is the absence of alcohol and the increase of anxiety, and also the associations of alcohol, the social associations and the ritualistic elements which are associated with them. So you put that all into the pot, and then what you've got is a mild deprivation, which is also socially acceptable to admit to on a poll in front of so many thousands of people. So after all of that together, I suspect that that's what we're probably looking at over here. It's definitely the easiest. Maybe if coffee had been excluded, like alcohol, that also would be something just in the same.
I know a lot of people, including Dan Stillman, who can't wait for the ground to open up again. That's for sure. Dr. Anthony, a question for you. It says, we want to engage in anal sex, but we are worried that it will stretch the rear and not go back into its normal shape, and then we'll lose bowel control. Can the doctor please advise how we can do this? So,
I think that, the point over here is that any kind of activity which is anatomically extreme is going to potentially damage. And I'm not talking about anal sex. I'm talking here about damage, which would be something with an object which cuts, like an operation that goes wrong. But the muscles around the anus are incredibly compliant. There's a massive amount of variability, and there's a capacity for it to be able to stretch. But what you don't want to do is introduce anal sex too quickly or to traumatize the muscle, because there's also, it's not only the muscle itself, but it's also the brain which is controlling the muscle and which is causing the body, and in fact, the whole pelvic floor to become tense. So you need to, in a sense, train the muscles to be able to relax accordingly. And if you've done that sufficiently well, then the muscles themselves won't be damaged. So there's kind of a better way to do it and there's a worse way to do it, which is to say doing it kind of slowly and with care and with adequate lubrication, which is incredibly important.
Dr. Eve?
I want to add, and I'm sure you know this much better than what I do, but what has been put out by CDC and WHO is that the virus is transmitted through feces. So one wants to be careful of having anal penetration right now. That's the only sexual warning that's been given, is not to be having anal penetration or anal play now. So for anyone who is doing that, please make sure that you use a condom and you use a great anal lube, and maybe desist from doing that right now, because that's where the virus seems to be sitting, according to what they're saying.
Very valuable advice. Dr. Eve, I see some people have told us that they found the Rosie app on the Google Play Store, but they can't seem to find it on Apple. Do you know if it's by any chance available on the Apple platform?
Yeah, I was able to download it in half a heartbeat on the Apple platform. So you should just on your apps, in your app store, go into your app store and just get Rosie, ROSY, and you'll be able to get it.
So we need to start wrapping up. There is a reminder from someone on the line that tells us that the days of wham bang, thank you ma'am, are well over, and it is the obligation of both partners in a relationship, or all partners in a relationship, to be able to satisfy fully their partner. So I would like to do one whip around the panel, if I may do that for want of a better description. And we've asked people whether the coronavirus has positively affected their sex life. 13% of people agree and 31% say disagree. So it looks like corona has attacked every element of our lives, including our sex lives. But in our final whip around the panel, Dr. Anthony, you have mentioned that this is a good time to maybe be playful, be adventurous. So I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to give one last piece of advice to everyone watching tonight. Let's start with you, Anthony.
I think I want to echo what Dr. D said earlier about the power of words, storytelling, and communicating through description. Because I think we're such a visual culture. We tend to forget what the auditory sound can do. I mean, we've also mentioned audio sex type erotica stories. So I think being able to tell stories or speak or create something out of a story which is able to incorporate and engage with the kinds of fantasies that we have is a great way to be able to extend yourself and also find a different way to communicate with your partner.
Dr. D?
We've been talking a lot about thinking about the other and meeting their needs and being kind for them, and it's a chart to them, and it's a chance, which it is all true, to reconnect. We've just alluded to how you need to treat yourself, and I think that that's something that's really important, whether it's a sexual activity or whether it's any other need that you might have. A lot of times people say yes because they don't want to rock the boat, or when they really mean no. And I think that unless you're in touch and have a way of saying your needs are important, but so are mine. And if there's that disparity, sometimes you build up resentment to the very person who you're trying to be nice to, and it can explode. So just to end, I just think to say that a priority is that there are two people in the relationship, both have needs. Find ways of accessing what they are, and then good ways of communicating them that isn't submissive nor aggressive. It's you are important and so are mine. So let's work that out in a wonderful way using this opportunity.
Dr. Eve?
I'm going to pick up on the one part that Anthony spoke about, which is looking for the positives. And I'm going to link that into the message that I do want to leave with people. And it comes back to how to manage your trauma. enormous amount of work needs to be done, not on sexual techniques or, I mean, that's your thing, then that's cool. But I think it's, to get to that place, there really has to be a complete focus on the reality and an acceptance of the reality that I'm living with a low level of anxiety or a very high level of anxiety. And therefore I need to be practicing self-care, self-compassion, self-kindness. And I really recommend that people do things like a gratitude journal, of being able to write down 5 positive things about my partner that I enjoyed today, 5 positive things about myself that were good, 5 positive things about my children. Really focus on that practice of meditation, of living a much more mindful life. I really, that for me is way more important than any sexual technique.
Dr. Eve, before we go to Katrina, a few people have told us that Rosie and Deep Sea don't appear to be available on the South African App Store, Apple App Store. So maybe we can give you some homework tomorrow to contact Apple to tell them that the woman of South Africa are in desperate need, if they would please make sure that those apps are available on the South African App Store as well.
I will contact the team at Dipsy and tell them to do that.
Okay, Katrina, so the last words go to you. What advice do you have for all our hundreds and hundreds of viewers who've stayed with us very late into the night? It's now 11 o'clock in the evening, and we still have hundreds and hundreds of people with us. So what advice can you give them?
So I think for me, the advice that I want to leave everybody with is that it's about pleasure, not performance. We put so much pressure on ourselves that we should be doing this, we must do that. We don't have to be doing anything at this time. We just need to survive. We just need to get out on the other side. And so focusing on pleasure, and I don't mean just sexual pleasure, I mean joy, I mean connection, I mean intimacy, through means like flirting, I think is so, so important, whether you are in a relationship or whether you're single and you're looking to connect with other people. The playfulness and the lightness that can bring at a time when we're kind of all bogged down by this stress, by this uncertainty, by this lockdown is really, really important. So to focus on the pleasure of your interactions, not the performance and the rules and the shoulds associated to your interactions.
I want to tell a story to all our panelists. I think if I've done one good deed in life, it was probably to introduce Katrina to my friend, Dr. Ruth. And that's the way how Katrina became my second favorite sex therapist after Dr. Ruth. And I now have many others. So Dr. Eve, you must be number 3, and Dori maybe number 4, and Anthony number 5. But I want to tell you and end with the story that Dr. Ruth in fact told me. She said she was always a little embarrassed about what she did for a living, to such an extent that she never allowed her husband to come to any of her talks or any of her lectures. And here you have the world's most famous sex therapist who just didn't want her husband involved in what she did for a living. She said, but one day, 60 Minutes, the American TV program, called her, and it was Diane Sawyer, and said, can we come film in your home in New York? And she knew that her husband had a huge crush on Diane Sawyer, so she decided to make an exception. And she told Mr. Westheimer he could stay in the apartment while Diane Sawyer came and would film them in the apartment. And Diane Sawyer arrived with this huge television crew, and she said, do you mind if we have a little film of the two of you on the couch together? They stuck up the cameras, and Dr. Ruth and Mr. Westheimer sat on the couch together, when suddenly Diane Sawyer said, so tell me, Mr. Westheimer, how's your sex life? And he said, the cobbler's children have no shoes. So I would like to thank all our cobblers on the panel this evening. It's been the most fantastic, informative, and enlightening on what for many people I think find a very difficult subject. But I think we've covered enormous ground during a very difficult time in people's lives. And I think we've added great value to all the hundreds, in fact, the thousands of people who've watched us this evening. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Dan Stillerman, who is the machine behind everything that we do. And I want to tell you what's coming up, for what the Juice Report has in store for you over the next few days. So Dan and I and Dina Diamond have been putting together, in fact, on Saturday night, The Amazing Race. and it's going to be a family fun event where you're going to join into teams, and we're going to zip you right around the world for about an hour and a half as your teams compete to try and get to the finish line in time. And that's going to be at 8 p.m. on Friday evening. And then on Sunday afternoon, we in fact have a variety show.
Saturday, Howie.
Sorry. That's on
Chas
Saturday.
Shalom, it would be on a Friday.
No, sorry. That's on, I'm talking about 8 o'clock on Saturday, but on Sunday afternoon, we had such a huge success with our variety show, Lockdown's Got Talent, that in fact on Sunday afternoon, we're doing Yid Kids Have Got Talent. And we've got a whole bunch of under 18 performers throughout the community who are going to be singing and playing musical instruments and doing a remarkable professional performance for people on Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And I can tell you that on Tuesday, coming up on Tuesday, Herschel Jarvitz will be hosting a panel called Keeping You and Your Business Afloat During These Difficult Times. And that will be at 8 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. So those are the next 3 events that the Jewish Report are going to be bringing you over the next few days. Thank you for Dan for helping put us all of this together. A huge thank you to all 4 of our panelists this evening. You guys have been absolutely remarkable. And to everyone who's watched us, please tune in on Saturday night. Bring your friends, bring your family, bring the teams. We've got an amazing race and an amazing journey that we'll go on together. So thank you all and good night. Please tune, stay safe and stay sanitized.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.